Live from the seat of Macquarie, this is the Paul Murray Live Pub Test.
And welcome Australia to the first of our pub tests involving the seats that matter, and no seat matters more than Macquarie on the edges of Sydney. It starts in the northwest around Richmond and it makes its way all the way through the Blue Mountains. This seat was won by the Labor Party at the last election. Was that a high watermark for the Liberal Party, or is this going to be one of those places that will help sandbag against other losses to fake independence and things that might be happening in other states? There's only one way to find out, and that's to talk to the people who'll be voting here. Some of them are joining us here tonight. Of course, there are also many of them the viewers of this program. I'm looking forward to the current MP and her challenger joining us in a few minutes' time. But first, as always, my view on the day's news. Apologies to all the Labor people in the room. Now, Albo seems to have a little real people problem. Let me explain. Now, of course, when Four Corners, who would normally carry the water for the Labor side, well, they sat down and talked to normal people. They said this about Each Way Albo.
What's the first thing you think of when I say the name Anthony Albanese?
Unknown, untested and untried.
What would you say Anthony Albanese stands for?
Getting elected.
Is he leadership material? Haven't seen that yet.
And then when Carl was doing his best to do an advertorial, they also met real people, and this is what happened.
What do you think of the election coming up? I'm right here.
No comment.
People are brutal, aren't they, on the road? What's wrong with Albo?
You're looking good, yeah.
Thank you.
You've lost weight, yeah, hasn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Huh? Good on you. I'm big in Lonnie. Aren't you?
Nailed it. Now also, so therefore, it doesn't really matter because the media will be doing much of the narrative building, as we've talked about before, and the polls tell us that this thing is apparently already a slam dunk. So we know that when it comes to ideas, it's all about small target, even though that small target, when it comes to things like the delivery of nurses, and that promise is not looking great after just a few days. But still, the theory is that it's all about Scott Morrison to blow himself up, and it's all about people to have a negative view of Scott Morrison. So therefore, as little Albo as possible is what you need to do between now and when it really matters. So we have seen over the past couple of days that weird rally in Queensland where apparently he was running for Iowa Senate or something like that, because Albo 2022 is not Kevin 07. But that was the rally that took place in Queensland. And then yesterday, he gave a speech to the National Farmers Federation and did a press conference in Canberra. Again, not a huge chance of any normal people jumping out and being able to tell their views of the alternative Prime Minister. So today, the plan was to go to Western Australia and finally get a little bit of that Emperor McGowan dust, where the Western Australian Premier has already said he's going to campaign for and with Albo. He wants a change of government. So whatever powerful factor that will be, we'll have to wait and see. But as you know by now, it didn't entirely go to plan because a normal person got involved.
I've got a tough question.
Hang on.
Are you up for it? I've got a tough question. Are you up for it?
Funny thing about normal people, they don't care whether it's the media's job to ask questions or whether they want to. Now, in my view, as long as it's always respectful, as long as you always keep your distance, as long as you don't make a pill of yourself, you've got a right as an Australian to do that. And no doubt there will be plenty of Australians who will try to do that between now and the election. So how did the alternative Prime Minister handle this interaction with a normal person?
Hang on.
Are you up for it? I've got a tough question. Are you up for it?
I'm absolutely up for it.
Okay, good.
And sorry, we can't really do that.
But was he really up for it? Because he thought that the question just was, so are you up for it? No, he had an actual question.
We can't really do that. The protocol, the Media Alliance will be a bit upset if we...
I don't think the media will mind at all. I've said, are you up for it? Are you up for it?
I'm absolutely up for it.
Okay, so my question is,
we're just taking questions from journalists.
No, shush. Now look, is he just getting all of the awkward stuff out of the way early? Maybe. Maybe he'll be able to lift in his form between now and then. But the early days don't show a bloke who's all that interested in actually getting out of the bubble. Now, you would think that if you're 10 points in front, every single day you would invite the cameras with you to a local shopping centre where you would be mobbed by normal people. Why isn't that happening? Maybe that is the plan for the final 3 weeks of the campaign. But you would think that if you are that far in front, you would be that confident that nothing's going to be able to dent your armour, let alone a normal bloke who might embarrass himself with this question, but because you wouldn't let him answer his question, he ends up embarrassing you. Now, of course, there was opportunity for the Prime Minister today because he decided to jump on the comments of the Shadow Treasurer yesterday in Canberra. When asked, do you agree on a tax cap, the total amount of taxation revenue that can be gathered by a federal government, he didn't answer, which of course means no.
We're not attracted to the government's tax cap. It seems to us like quite an arbitrary cap imposed for political reasons rather than good economic reasons. The arbitrary tax cap that the government has imposed, which the government doesn't hit, by the way, in the forwards from memory, is something that they say to try and have a political argument rather than to try and generate a genuine economic outcome.
So the PM thought that there was a little bit of wiggle room here, and with a 38% doubt level right now about the leadership of Each Way Albo, the PM was on the attack today.
Labor wants to take the tax cap off. They want to let it rip. They want to have a no-limits tax policy. We told you that these are the sorts of things that Labor would do. Why would you want to get rid of a tax cap if you didn't want to increase taxes? I think it's pretty clear.
But of course, the reality is that the media doesn't really care about the actual issues like that or the wobbles in the policies, because it's all about character, principally the Prime Minister's character, despite the fact that the Mean Girls, well, couldn't mention it for a couple of weeks, could you? But now people on the Liberal side of things start hooking in. So this was the questioning that happened last night on the 7:30 report, and the Prime Minister showed us about how his plan is to campaign, which is, I don't care what the question is, this is the answer.
When you look at the threats to your government's survival, they're almost all own goals. Almost all of the incoming fire is from your own missteps or from inside your own party. Why would the public trust you with another term as Prime Minister when many people on your own side don't seem to trust you?
Lee, over the last 3.5 years since I took on this job, I said I wanted to keep our economy strong, I wanted to keep Australians safe and keep Australians together. And at that time, none of us could foresee what would come in the form of the pandemic and the many other disasters. But at the end of that, where are we? We've saved 40,000 lives. The Australian economy has come through this pandemic stronger than all of the G7 countries in the world. We have the second rated highest pandemic preparedness in the world. We've got unemployment down to 4% and falling. Now, that is doing what I said I would do. And I don't get distracted by all the other things because that's not my job. Okay. My job is to focus on those things. We've delivered on those, and more importantly, we've got the plan to keep doing it, to keep Australia strong in the future.
Now, most important thing in politics is to say the same thing over and over again until you are sick of saying it, because that is when people start hearing it. The media doesn't like it. Many people who talk about politics don't like it, but it's the way to actually communicate with people who, I know this is shocking to the media, have other things to do with their life than sit down and notice everything that we have to say. So, game on, see how it goes in the next little while. As always, I think there are big questions, and if Albo can answer them, well, he wins the election. But I have a reason why I don't think he's going to. The big questions: who will pay more tax? Why do I ask that question? Because, of course, the clean-up in aisle 3, which Chalmers tried to do yesterday, resulted in more questions. Oh, yeah, and then there was the time that Albo wouldn't answer that question.
You won't increase taxes.
Yeah, we've made it very clear.
I don't know that you're answering the question. It's pretty.
Yes, I am.
Is it a yes or a no?
I am, absolutely.
Will you be increasing taxes?
We will be announcing our measure on multinational tax evasion.
The second one, which is, why do you think that climate change is a bigger threat to Australia than China? Again, I'm not pulling this one out of my ample backside, but I'm going on his particular messaging. Why? Because, of course, when asked about national security, he gave a speech where he mentioned climate change more than China, more than Russia, more than Ukraine combined.
Action on climate change. Climate change. Climate emergency. Climate change on climate change. The implications of climate change to combat climate change. Acting on climate change. Action on climate change.
Announcement from the Labor Party was, remember the COP26 that took place in Glasgow? Well, under a Labor government, they would bid for one like it was the Olympic Games, so that such a conference would be held in Australia in the first term of an Albanese government. Now, for somebody who's all in on climate change, this might be the perfect thing for you. But it brings us to the next question, which is who really pays for the 2030 target of 43%? In my view, it's Shorten's plan that was rejected last time, just given new wrapping paper. Why do I say that? Because despite the fact that Labor have openly said that they have a $20 billion plan to rewire the nation, the CSIRO tell us that the total cost of rewiring and re-energising the country is $1.4 trillion. That's not a right-wing think tank, that's the CSIRO. Oh yeah, a couple of other ones. Who'll be the Defence Minister? Oh, they won't tell us that till after the election. Will it be Christina Keneally having responsibility for the borders or the budget? Because that also is the speculation that they're not doing anything about. Oh yeah, and finally, who's really in charge? The Mean Girls or the Greens? Now, if Scott Morrison is going to win this election, he has to pull off exactly what happened in 2019, and that includes preference discipline from former Liberal Party voters who go off to minor parties. Now, it was pretty obvious in the 2019 campaign that a lot of money being spent by Clyde Palmer helped define Bill Shorten. This time he's running a pox on all their houses campaign, and he still hasn't made it clear whether every sitting MP goes last, which obviously could end up disproportionately hitting the Liberal Party, or is he going to, at the last minute, flip it all and have a go at Albanese? Well, he gave this very interesting interview to Peter Gleeson yesterday on Sky News.
Opposition leader Anthony Albanese says he wants to govern using the template of the Palaszczuk government. What does that mean for Australia?
Disaster. It means disaster for this country. Of course, elections are important to hold politicians to account, to know what their program is and know what you're voting for. Nobody knows what Albo is going to do. We just know that he's further left than Bill Shorten. We can just look at Shorten's policies at the last election, and we've got to tell Albo he's dreaming. Although he's lost weight, and I admire him for doing that and having the mental courage, he needs to be honest with the Australian people and tell them what are the Labor policies, what do they intend to do.
So let's talk about this and a whole lot more. That is in the news today with Chris Smith, my colleague at Sky News, the wonderful Jo Hildebrand, also my colleague at Sky News, and she might as well be a colleague as well, is the wonderful Bronwyn Bishop. Everyone give them a round of applause here in Springwood at the Royal Hotel. Lovely to have you here. All right. Now, again, we'll get into the local stuff with the people who matter most, which are the two people who want to represent a seat that we would all agree that the only way for the Liberal Party to get anywhere near 76 is that they have to win here. Labor, if they underperform here, well, then it's going to show some other issues about whether they're going to get to minority or majority government, so that's going to be fascinating. But another opinion poll comes out today that tells us by a huge margin people back the government when it comes to the economy, but by a big margin people back the opposition when it comes to cost of living. Chris, how do you think that actually means anything for the election? What does that poll mean for you?
I think it means bugger all. If you have a look at the time in which they surveyed people, it started on the Wednesday. We had the budget on the Tuesday. We didn't have the budget reply until Thursday night. They then continued their surveying of people for 2 days afterwards. So 50% of the people never saw Albo not deliver on cost of living. So here he is getting credit for cost of living and health. Now, Labor will always win an argument about health because there's a perception that they'll throw money at health, as they always do. But cost of living, he did nothing in that budget reply about... As a matter of fact, he made fun of getting a handout, a one-off handout, and he made fun of dropping the excise on petrol, which, as you can see at the Bowser today, as I filled up before I came to Springwood, is starting to cut through. Now, I don't know. I reckon this is I wouldn't read too much into this. I think it should have been done after the reply 100%.
But also it's that thing, Joe, where I understand how you can win an election by defining a problem, saying cost of living, wages don't match it, please vote for us. But you have to have a solution for how to deal with it, or in 3 years' time they come and kick your head off because they hired you to do a job you didn't do.
Yeah, well, to sound like Sir Humphrey Appleby, not necessarily. You don't necessarily have to have a solution. You just, all that really matters in politics is that people think you're doing something and they feel like you're doing something. So let's just put that giant bit of cynicism on the table. I think with the cost of living thing, I think there is a perception that Labor will always be more compassionate. It will always be less focused on the budget bottom line, which means it will always be more generous when it comes to helping people get by. And of course, it's traditionally the party of lower income earners for whom cost of living is a bigger problem. Now, you kind of answered your own question earlier on, and you're absolutely right. It's the way you frame these issues and it's the way you define these issues. Now, the general rule of thumb is that people will always vote for the government based on economic reasons, and if the economy's going well, the government will be returned. But that hasn't always panned out in recent years, and I actually spoke to the guy who did this polling, and he mentioned the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." That wasn't a Conservative Party phrase. That was Bill Clinton. That was the Democrats. And the reason they were able to use that slogan and why it was so successful is because they got a pollster who I did a session with years ago, who said that when they asked people, he was polling for the Democrats, said when they asked people who's best at managing the economy, they all said Republicans by a margin of something like 20%, huge margin, double digits. When they said who's best at managing the economy for working people, suddenly there was a turnaround and a majority said Democrats. And so they were able to say who's better at managing the economy for you. And you saw a gap in that same poll of people who, I'll just quickly finish, sorry, Anna, who said, oh, we think the budget's good for the economy, but we don't think it's good for us. And so when it comes to saying who's good at managing the economy, they say the coalition. When they're asked who's good at managing cost of living, suddenly it's the Labor Party, and that's what they're going to.
And also, as we saw in the 2013 election after the 2010 election, which was you will be forever punished when you break a promise. And George Bush in that particular election, remember, was read my lips, no new taxes. They ended up putting up taxes, so they were able to make the most of disquiet that was already there. What does this poll tell you, Bronwyn?
Well, it certainly doesn't tell me what Joe said it tells me. I heard that interview, Joe, and I thought this is one of the biggest spins I've heard in a long time, because the reality was, just as Paul said, read my lips. When George Bush had promised no new taxes, read my lips, and then the first thing he does is put up taxes. That's why Clinton was able to come back and say it's about the economy and I won't be doing what George Bush did. He committed suicide with that. So what it means to me, and what I think is important, is what the economy means is how much tax you pay. It means, do you have a job? It means, how are the interest rates for your house? And then we come to the inevitable question of fuel tax. That is a push button issue if ever there was one. And I've said before about how John Howard lost the by-election in Ryan when John Moore resigned and petrol prices were going up, but won it in Aston because he cut fuel excise. Every economist in town will tell you it's a lousy thing to do because you can't build roads and you can't do this. It's not a hypothecated tax. It just goes into general revenue like everything else. The important thing to know is, are the people of Australia going to trust Albo, who is from the socialist left with a taxing disposition and a penchant for China and all things that are starting to bubble through people's minds, come back to the economy and saying, I think this bloke has a better grasp of managing it.
So what about what happened today? So I don't know how this was packaged up on the 6 p.m. news. A little busy putting together tonight's show, so I don't know what emphasis was put on it. Apparently there was an incident of somebody trying to get in the PM's face tonight. I haven't seen it. If it's bad, we'll deal with it tomorrow night. What about Albo just not dealing with that bloke's question? Because I can understand why. You go, well, hang on, mate. We're here for reporters. Reporters are only supposed to do it. But there's that fine moment when if you're that far in front, you're playing with the bank's money. Can't you afford to... If worst case scenario, the bloke's going to look like a goose, not you.
Yeah, look, I probably would have done it. But I think we're living in an age where politicians are extremely risk averse. There was probably a press sec standing at the back of the pack going, "Don't stop, change subject." So there's probably that. And also, I suppose, in a highly charged election environment, you don't know if someone's a bit volatile. You don't know what they're going to say. But again, I'm one of those people where I probably would have taken the risk. I remember being on the trail. I think there's two politicians or opposition leaders who had that star power where people would sort of swamp them in shopping centres. One was obviously Bob Hawke, and the other was Kevin Rudd. And I think with Kevin...
That's Kevin calling now.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, we mentioned you on TV, Karen. It's okay. You can go back and watch your ABC now.
Obviously, people didn't know Kevin back then. But there was something different about it. It was because he came across as a sort of cuddly nerd, a lovable nerd, something like that. But I remember being with him at, say, the Wacker or whatever, and he's going around and there are people saying, "Hey, Kevin, come over here," and they're half cut and they've got to be, "Hey, have a beer," and he sort of looks at me. I'm like a journo, but he's looking at me sort of saying, "What do I do?" I said, "Go and have the
interact.
Go and have the
when
beer.
all those styles
Just go
interact.
and have the beer." And of course, all those scenes, you would have seen them during the campaign, were what made him.
But again, my point is, if you're 10 points in front, if it's such a slam dunk, if it is so absolute that there is no chance that he's going to lose, don't you take the risk? It's far enough out. It's not 2 days before the election. It's maybe 3 before they even announce an election.
He's terrified of 2 questions, and one of them is, of course, what are you going to do about the mean girls? Because, excuse me, although people think that the mean girls question might have gone away, it hasn't. As I've said before, it is because every girl back in her childhood remembers who a mean girl was. Why that inquiry is important and why that man might have been asking that question and he didn't want to go there is because what we really want to know are those 3 girls, Penny Wong, Christina Keneally and Senator Gallagher, are those 3 people fit and proper people to be shadow ministers, let alone ministers? That is a very significant question. If we watched, unlike the criticisms that have come against the Prime Minister, we watched Kimberley Kitching shrink before our very eyes on the television week after week. She was under enormous problems and enormous pressure. And ostracisation, being ostracised, is truly bullying. Look it up in any dictionary. The difference between the 2 attacks is that Kimberley can't speak for herself because she is dead.
But Chris, how much friendly fire can the PM take? Because the media will go there. Why wouldn't they? At what point do the people sit back and go, we just have to say nothing because the media will always go and have a look at this MP, this former. I mean, I can't believe we're doing the text thing again. But I think that there's no one with doubt left about the issue of whether you're thumbs up or thumbs downing the good bloke or otherwise factor of the PM. How much friendly fire can you take, though? Because it's every day, it's multiple fronts, and on multiple fronts, that's how you lose a war.
I get the feeling that they've fired all their bullets way too early. We haven't even had an announcement of an election yet, which will come, from what we know, Sunday. We haven't even, blown the whistle to start the game. They've fired too early. You've got to, they're going into the booth, two weeks or 3 weeks before the 21st. Say it's the 21st that we have to vote. So they start polling earlier than that online for those who can't get there on the date. This is going to be over, I think. I think bigger issues start to play into the 6 o'clock news, the front page of the newspaper the next day, and I think they've fired too early. They've all come out at once. We had Pauline, we had all of them, all come out at the same time. If you really want to make a dent, you've got to spread these attacks out. They haven't done that.
But also it's interesting, right? Listening to FM News, where, of course, compulsory voting. What are people doing? They're watching maths. They're listening to Kyle in the morning. God love you, brother, right? So, again, there's a conversation about the people watching this show, listening to, Arnie PK in the morning on Radio National, and there are the actual people who'll decide the election, including in this particular electorate. Essentially, Morrison has to be on the attack in order to be able to come back, doesn't he? So these things keep him on the defence. So if you're kept on the defence all the time, how do you possibly mount an attack that anyone's ever going to hear?
Well, because I think Chris has got a point about firing mass attack now. But he does have to come out on the front foot and, in fact, attack and just push it in the background.
But also, you saw too, Joe. That interaction, again, I always love the lazy Twitter got the shits with something article that turns up 5 minutes after an interview where this was a fiery stoush between Lee Sales and the Prime Minister. Again, I expect that if you talk to any of them, they stay on message, and it's frustrating, but he stayed on message. He wasn't scared about the moment, and I just think that message discipline is ultimately, as well as the grind, that's what gets you there.
Yeah, look, firstly, I don't like it when political parties turn on each other. I put quite a bit of stock in loyalty, and it's why I basically didn't talk to anyone from the ALP for about a decade after the Kevin and Julia fiasco. But I think that has been rehabilitated to some extent now. I think this is sort of almost total war. I think there's a couple of things going on. You've got people who have absolutely nothing to lose, so they can become suicide bombers because they're dead already.
Yep.
And that was the case, obviously, with Catherine Cusack, who I don't think is up for re-election.
Conchetta.
And, of course, Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells. Now, in the case of Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells, that was incredibly strategic. I mean, that wasn't just a
That
sort
was
of
budget
cluster
night, so
bomb.
the next
that
morning,
was right
boom,
on the
boom,
budget
boom,
bomb,
boom,
and they desperately needed a bounce from the budget. It was very well received. The best the opposition could do was just wave it through and hope people stop talking about it. Everyone's getting money. It's candy to a baby. And she just right at that time completely just derailed the entire narrative. So instead of talking about how much money each voter was going to get, literally instead of writing cheques, Scott Morrison yet again has to say, I'm not a bully, I'm not a monster. And of course, we all know the Lyndon Johnson Hod theory, which is as soon as he said, well, I'll just start a rumour my opponent has sexual relations with his hogs. He's a hog farmer, ain't he? And his staff goes, Lyndon, we can't prove that. And he goes, I don't want you to prove it. I just want to hear him deny it. and as soon as you say, I'm not a monster, I'm not a bully,
which is why when you get asked the question, anyway, about the economy, blah, 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 blah.
That's right. So I think that part was very strategic, but the rest of it is just an absolute total war, blitzkrieg. And I think people, and it's working, and I think people think, right, he's going to lose anyway, so he's not going to be Prime Minister next time around, so I can say whatever I want about him, get my kicks in, and then when he goes down, I can be on the side that was winning. I mean, that's what you do, isn't it? When you know someone's going down, when you know the whale's going down, you've got to try and get it.
Yeah, the problem is that's what they thought last time.
Joe, you are Albo's best friend. You are out there pushing him. You got that headline, he's not woke. How you did that is a mystery to everybody.
Some of his best work.
Some of his best work. Now, the point is, you've just painted a picture in terminology that Albo simply can't do because you have energy and he hasn't. And if there's one thing you need in a campaign, it is energy. You have to have the stamina. Malcolm Turnbull didn't have it. Paul Keating didn't have it. And if you haven't got it, you really are starting behind the eight ball. And as I said, Albo couldn't possibly say what Joe just said because he just hasn't got the energy and the wherewithal to do it.
I haven't texted it to him yet.
Yeah. Keep helping. All I'll say is keep helping. Now, Chris, I want to talk to something before we get to our questions, candidates, and the Solomon Islands. It's a big story, particularly about China and reaching out. But you noticed two big things. One, this has been a long time coming. And two, the local press in the Solomon Islands is now starting to show a bit of a backflip from the government there.
Yeah. We know that the pact was aimed at leading to some kind of military base featuring Chinese battleships. The Chinese embassy in the Solomon Islands today said this is just a fabrication of colonialists, meaning Australia, because we're scared of, our backyard, etc. And then the Prime Minister of the Solomons said, we would never, he came out front page, Solomon's Times today, front page, from a national address saying, we would never ever allow a foreign entity in to have a military base, ever. And that Australia is our partner of choice, right? So these two denials about ever thinking about a military base can be thrown in the garbage. The Chinese are liars because something fell off the back of a truck, which was a document I received from my contacts in the Solomon Islands. It was a document written by a Chinese state-owned company, AVIC International Project Engineering Company. The president of that company spoke to one of the province's premiers in September 2020 and said, we are writing this letter to demonstrate our intent to study the opportunities to develop naval and infrastructure projects on leased land for the People's Liberation Navy for the Isabel province with exclusive rights for 75 years. And then goes on, before we start the project, China would assist the Solomon Islands with infrastructure, education and sport. Our expertise will help you with your military cooperation with China. This is evidence that in 2020 September, the conversation was already being had between a state-owned entity, to the Solomon Islands leadership to say, we're going to set up a military base for the People's Liberation Army. The Chinese are out and out liars. They lied today, and they've lied every day when referring to this pact which was signed last week.
Well done. Excellent information. You'll have plenty more on your show, both on radio and telly. We might talk about it again on the other side of the forum. After the break, the people who will decide the election are the people who live in the seat of Macquarie. That is where we are tonight with our pub test. You will hear their questions and their candidates next. Thank you very much for watching. We're back here on Paul Murray Live, as I was just double-checking my notes. What exciting television for you to see. We are here in the seat of Macquarie. It is one that is currently held by the Labor Party, and I'm pleased to say that both the Labor MP, playing an away game on Sky News, thank you, and the Liberal candidate join us right now. Put your hands together for Susan Templeman, who's your current MP, and Sarah Richards, who would like to be the next MP. Ladies, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Now, despite the fact that you certainly know my opinion when it comes to the election, this is not about me. This is about hearing from normal people, asking you guys whatever. Feel free to interrupt each other if you wish, but let's keep it straight and about people like our good friend here. All right, so Josh, g'day mate. What's your question for the ladies?
Yeah, g'day Sarah, g'day Susan. My question is to both of you. In your opinion, from highest to lowest, could you rank the following 4 items by its threat to the future of Australia and our way of life? 1, the high level of government debt. 2, the effects of climate change. 3, China. And 4, energy security.
All right. Well, we'll start with you. Susan. Go for it.
They are all really important issues, and I think it's a bit arbitrary to say rank them 1 to 4. Governments need to be able to deal with a lot of issues at the same time, and the ones you've identified are all really key. You know, we live here in an area that's really vulnerable to changing climate. We're the front line. We're paying the price for work that hasn't been done in previous years. Fires, floods, storms, we all know this. I think our international relations are really crucial, not just with China, but we also have to think about the impact in the Pacific. And we were just hearing from the panel, you know, what's happening in the Solomons is something where Australia has dropped the ball in the Pacific and China has taken advantage of that. So it's also important. Now, fuel security was one of the key inquiries that I did when I first came to Parliament. That was 5 years ago, and we knew it was a big issue then. So all of them are absolutely crucial. And debt, well, debt is probably not an issue if you've got something to show for it. But I think what we've seen under the last 9 years of government is $1 trillion of debt, not a lot to show for it.
Sarah?
Thank you, and thank you, Josh, for your question. It's fundamentally important, all of the topics that you addressed there. And I firmly believe that they are all something that the government needs to look into. Now, government debt, if you talk about that one first, we had a budget delivered last week by Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer of Australia, who put forward a plan for this country to address that debt, but also to address the cost of living right now, which is important. In terms of climate change and energy security, we also have a Minister, Angus Taylor, who is looking after that and making sure that we have a plan to get to net zero by 2050. And then you touch on defence. As the daughter of a veteran and someone who grew up living on Iraq bases, our defence security is important to me. And there is no one else we can trust other than Scott Morrison and the Liberal Party to ensure that national security is a priority moving forward.
Okay.
So the question was to rank them, but neither of you have managed to do that.
Okay, forgive me for doing so. Apparently there's a technical issue that means we take a quick break. We'll deal with this in a second. More from the pub in a second. Welcome back here. We've got it all working now. All right, let's continue with the questions for the people who would like to represent the most marginal electorate in the country right now. Susan Templeman is, of course, the current MP. She's with the Labor Party, and the person challenging her and got very close last time is, of course, Sarah Richards from the Liberal Party. Got plenty of people wanting to ask their questions tonight, including Fiona. What's your question to these lovely ladies?
Good evening, ladies. My question is about Australian manufacturing. So in regards to the Australian government sending their manufacturing overseas, based on the cheaper costs of getting it done there, wouldn't it be more beneficial to have the manufacturing here in Australia by an Australian company and have that business, even though it might cost higher in the long run, the taxes and the monies from that company and the businesses, it stays in Australia. Do you think it is a responsible policy for the Labor or the Liberal government to adopt?
We'll start with you, Sarah. You came second last time, so go for it.
Question. And you may find over this election campaign, and in fact something that the Prime Minister has been prosecuting strongly over the last few weeks, is to bring manufacturing back to Australia. He has said it time and time again. And if re-elected for another term, that is a priority of this government. Now, out and about in the electorate of Macquarie, we have some fantastic manufacturers. In fact, I was at a business yesterday in Mulgrave, a business where I've grown up in this area most of my life. Did not know this business manufactured these parts here in Macquarie, and I was blown away by what they do. And when you see those success stories of the businesses locally, I know that we can absolutely maximise that across the country.
Susan, let's talk manufacturing.
Well, I think it's one thing to talk about making things here, but what COVID showed us is that we have huge gaps. Gaps in key things. We saw it with masks. We saw it with hand sanitizer, where the gin makers in this electorate had to convert and make sanitizer. Now, that's a crime. But they did it because they knew we really needed that product and they had the capacity to do it. So we do need to learn the lessons from COVID about this. Now, just across the road from us is a train line. We are seeing trains that were not made in Australia that don't fit the lines. The tracks have to be changed to make and the station platforms to accommodate it. It's just insane. And so Labor's policy is, for instance, about having a national train manufacturing program so that all the states get together, because we are many states, but we can act as one country. And we can come up with a plan to allow the ongoing work so that we can have a really thriving train manufacturing sector. That's just one practical example. I think we're really lucky in this electorate. Down in the Hawkesbury, enormous capacity to make more things here. In fact, we had the only, at the start, the only rapid antigen manufacturer that was Australian that was allowed to sell rapid antigen tests here was a Hawkesbury manufacturer. So Innovation Scientific, that's what we should be looking at to keep making things here.
Good stuff. Thank you very much. Let's get Martin up now. Martin, you've got a question here for the ladies. Susan will be the first one to take it. What's your question?
Yeah, it's more of a local question than the previous ones. The Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury are probably the most bushfire-prone areas of Australia and possibly the world. And just like floods, we know that the next bushfire is coming to us. Fires run on fuel, and if we don't prepare by reducing fuel, the fires are normally much worse. I have previously exchanged emails with Susan Templeman, asking her to come out publicly and support the rights of property owners to be able to adequately hazard reduce. She has not done that. I wonder if she is frightened of her Green supporters. Now, considering that our local Hawkesbury Council has now agreed to allow us to clear along our fence lines, I would like to ask both ladies if they will make a genuine effort at a federal level for property owners to be allowed to better protect themselves on their own properties from the fires that inevitably come out of our national parks.
Susan, we'll start with you and let's go. About hazard reduction, what is your view on that?
Well, I'm someone who's lost their home in a bushfire, so nobody understands how devastating that can be and why we need to have the world's best standards in place so that we do the absolutely best we can to minimise the impacts. Now, hazard reduction is a really key part of it, and we've been really supportive of efforts to put in place traditional burns as one thing to trial, but I do think landowners should be able to have a process where they do it. Do I think that every fence line needs to be cleared? Well, the science doesn't suggest that that is the absolute optimum way. So I think what we should really be doing at a federal level, at a state level, at a council level, but more importantly, at a local community level, is have these conversations, not just pull a number out of the hat as the state government has, but actually work through for our community. Because I've got to say, this is an electorate that's 4,000 square kilometres. what works in one part of the electorate might not be the right solution for another. And I think we have to have much more serious conversations, and you have to be able to take the best possible steps to protect yourselves. And as a responsible landowner, I know that that's what you really want to do.
Sarah?
With all due respect, Susan, you have personally attacked me on this issue, especially when I have stood up and am on the public record supporting the very thing that you are advocating for. So what you have just said then does not reflect on what you put out into the public. Now, Martin, absolutely, categorically support your rights to protect your property, have voted for that on Hawkesbury City Council, have made that an election commitment leading up to the council elections, and stand by it now, have voted for it now. And it is quite a shame when Labor Party and the Greens want to use that niche issue, and as someone who has joined the RFS because of the 2019-2020 bushfires and commit my time to the Communications Brigade, to stand there and actually say that advocating and supporting you to protect your property becomes a political issue where we still have to sit here tonight and hear that when we know what has played out locally on the ground is not the case. So thank you for your question, and the answer is yes.
Yes, Susan, what's Sarah talking about there?
Should be really clear about this. What I was very pleased to see was the original council decision to ask for some expert advice from the RFS, from other experts in the area before implementing it. And I am very critical when people stand up and talk about how precious our koalas are, at the same time willing to, without expert advice, allow land that is crucial in our region to stop the fragmentation of koala habitat. So I'm really happy to be critical of a position that someone takes on an issue.
And those two issues are not mutually exclusive.
We should really be letting the experts guide this, the scientists, the experts and the RFS.
So, Sarah, what is the when you say about the issues being not mutually exclusive, what is your position on those?
So my position on that is quite clear about the Rural Boundary Clearing Code, which has been endorsed by the RFS Commissioner. It is New South Wales legislation. There were certain councils across New South Wales that automatically applied to. There were certain councils that had to opt in. What is being referred to here is the federal government's commitment to protect koalas. Now, who does not like koalas? Everybody loves koalas. What was taken out of proportion during this debate locally was that they coincide with each other. They are not mutually exclusive. They are two different things. We can protect koalas, and we can also allow people to protect their homes and their lives from bushfire.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin. Let's get another question here. This one is Andrew. I think we've got Andrew next. I like a bit of back and forth. This is good. I like it. I appreciate it. All right, what's your question here, Andrew, for an MP and a prospective one?
G'day, ladies. It's about Headspace. It's pleasing that this facility will be established in the Hawkesbury no matter who wins office. It is, however, sad that this is required for our children of today. I was astounded recently that the death of Kimberley Kitchen brought to the light that she was the victim of bullying by members of her own party. Her family and friends said Kimberley referred to them as the mean girls. If we can't stop this within our corridors of Parliament, what chance do we have for our youth? For these allegations not to be investigated or pursued by certain media outlets reeks of double standards. Do you believe these allegations should be investigated?
All right, Sarah, we'll start with you. We're doing it in order.
Thank you, Andrew. And again, the simple answer is yes, and I will expand on that. They absolutely should, because there should not be one standard for one political party and another standard for another political party who want to bury their heads in the sand. The first part of your question related to Headspace. As the 2019 candidate 3 years ago, I was so proud to commit to delivering a Headspace in Katoomba in the Upper Blue Mountains here. That is open, that is functioning, that is working, addressing the health issues of our young people. Just a few weeks ago, I had Greg Hunt out in the Hawkesbury side of the electorate committing a Headspace to the Hawkesbury. $4.4 million committed, delivered over the next 18 months because Headspace National said that we needed a Headspace. That means, through my local advocacy, we have a Headspace in both parts of the electorate. And just to touch on the last bit, why we need it, because of the mean girls and the bullying. What has gone on in this electorate over the last 3 years, to me, to my family, my daughter's head, my 14-year-old daughter's head has been turned into a devil. and shared across Facebook. These are the reasons we need Headspace, because our teenage girls and our teenage boys have to deal with this. Now, the federal government brought into play at the start of the year the Online Safety Act. That is now legislation. I brought Michaelia Cash out to the electorate to go to my old high school at Bede Paulding College to tell the young kids that they are now protected by this legislation. They didn't know. After her speech, the kids came up to us and actually said, "This is fantastic. We didn't know we had this protection. Thank you for doing that now." And as a mum of 3 young kids who are on social media and going through all of that, politicians and parliamentarians need to set a standard. What's good for one is good for the other.
All right. Susan, what's your answer to all of what's just been raised?
They're really important issues, and I'll deal with a couple of things that you've touched on. But one thing I should say is the government failed to get its social media legislation, its so-called anti-trolling legislation, through the Parliament. It didn't leave enough time for it to be dealt with, so that if the Parliament doesn't go back, that legislation will now lapse, and that's disappointing. We were supporting that legislation. The name was a bit misleading, as the E-Safety Commissioner pointed out in inquiries. It's not actually about anti-trolling, but it was a good piece of legislation around defamation on social media. And I think when you touch on the commentary that there's been around how people treat each other respectfully or otherwise within political parties, there should be respect. And it is up to each of us to do whatever we can, whether it's on social media, to monitor and trying to get rid of the comments that are disrespectful. It's a hard job. It's a full-time job. And a lot of people jump on at 11 o'clock at night or midnight. So it's really hard to keep on top of that. I have found within the Labor Party that I don't always agree with my colleagues. I've come to politics later in life. I have, I had 47, 48 years of experience before I even put my hand up. So I've got a lot of strong views. But I have found that I've been always treated with respect. And I guess that's what we can do, is look at how we are treated and then how we treat others. Just on Headspace, it is no secret that my journey to politics was largely because of the experience of my family around my daughter's mental health issues. When she grew up in this beautiful area, but unfortunately at the age of 14 she was suicidal. She was self-medicating with alcohol. She had a lot going on in her head that we didn't know about. She didn't have the language to talk about it. So the thing that propelled me to go from my very comfortable business life into the role of being a public advocate was the issue of mental health. So I have advocated since the very first pre-selection I ran for in 2010 for better mental health services, especially for our young people. I'm really proud that we will now be able to say we have Headspaces. I don't know why it's taken 9 years for this government to do it. Children have died because of that. And we do have a Headspace at Katoomba. It's a small satellite one. I was there just last week. There is so much more that this community needs. And getting a Headspace in the Hawkesbury will be life-changing and transformative for families. But there is a lot we need to do.
Just in relation, though, do you believe there should be an investigation into those 3 ladies against Kimberley Kitchen? What has been alleged? That's yes or no? Should there be an investigation?
Well, if there is an investigation, then that will be for others to decide, not me. Simple as that.
Okay, we're going to take a break. Thank you very much for your question. We've got plenty more, including about floods, dams, super, and a whole lot more here on Paul Murray Live in Springwood. Welcome back to beautiful Springwood here in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney. We are in the most marginal electorate in the country. Put simply, the maths to get to 76 comes right through here. Will it be a Labor retain? If so, Susan Templeman will be returned as the MP. Or if there's a way for the government to get this seat, then that will mean, of course, that they're on their way to 76 as well. Got a lot of questions here. We'll talk to David, Jason and Ryan, and Sarah Richards is here from the Liberal Party as well. All right, what's your question?
Thanks, Paul. Good evening, ladies. I'll make this quick. Given that Water New South Wales is responsible for water, given the prevalence of the current flooding and the warnings, can you please let your electorate know what your stance is when discussing flood mitigation in the Nepean and Hawkesbury region? Could you tell us how you feel about increasing the wall height in the Warragamba Dam? What are you telling people when you're out there interacting when they're sweeping up their mess? What do you tell them to reassure them that this is being reduced, the risk is being reduced?
All right, Susan, the dam.
It has been really distressing seeing a second time. In fact, it's a third flood for the Hawkesbury within the space of 2 years. And I don't want to reassure people that there is no more flood coming. We can't do that because there has not been the mitigation done that needs to be done. Now, for 30 years, the state government has been trying to, the Libs in state government have been talking about raising the wall. Hasn't happened. Their own departments are the ones who raise issues of concern about it. I don't consider myself an expert on it. I think looking at what they're saying, the factions of the State Liberal Party will make that decision. But what I think we could be doing immediately is they could be changing legislation so that the existing dam could be used. If we're going to invest billions of dollars in raising a wall, wouldn't it be good to trial beforehand and see immediately if we can get some benefits out of using the dam as flood mitigation? But let's also immediately, long overdue, get evacuation routes in. A Pit Town evacuation route is a perfect example. And how about the North Richmond Bridge becomes something that might increase our flood resilience rather than just maintaining the status quo?
Okay, Sarah, your response as well?
Thank you very much for asking the question. And I think rather than swings and roundabouts in answers, having a yes or a no decisive answer to your question is important, especially when we're out there talking to voters across Macquarie. And my answer is yes, and I'll tell you why. Because I have grown up living in the Hawkesbury. I spent 12 months of my life living on the river in a house in Windsor. I have spent the last few years with my community, knee-deep in mud, looking after them during a flood. I have been on the public record supporting the raising of the Warragamba Dam wall, and I'll tell you why. Because I can't look turf farmers, veggie farmers, and people who live on a floodplain, being the third oldest colony in Australia, houses built well before we were even born, I can't look them in the eye and tell them I won't do what it takes to mitigate flood risk.
Well, you want to add a point? Yeah. Tell me the point because I want to get on to the next one.
Okay, I start off by saying I know it's a state issue, but I want to know what you, as the federal level, are going to do to encourage this mitigation to occur. Instead of blaming the states, let's go to work together and get this done.
Okay. Good on you, mate. Thank you very much.
Paul, I might just pick up on that. One of the things we're going to do is there's been a $4 billion fund that the Morrison government has had that we helped create that would be for emergency disaster response and mitigation. Not a cent has been spent. In fact, it's now accrued $800 million of interest. We're going to convert that to a purely mitigation fund so that there is several hundred millions every year, repeatedly, year after year, to help all our communities be more resilient to flood, fire, storm and the natural disasters that we are so prone to.
Sarah, 15 seconds if you want to add, but I do want to get one else. Let's get our next questioner up. Go.
And there's a reason for that. That fund has been put aside for future use, and right now, because we have a government who can actually run a budget, there is money in the bank to actually attack those sort of issues now and help people who really need it on the ground in these disasters.
We haven't seen a cent of money into flood mitigation.
Because there is money available elsewhere.
I do love the supporters of both sides in the pockets of the corners here. All right, let's keep going. Jason, g'day.
How you doing? My question's more aimed at Susan. And around the cost of living, we talked about the cost of living, and it scares me that they think that Labor are better for the cost of living. But as a person that's entering twilight years of his career and heading towards where I want to retire and live within the superannuation that I created for myself as a self-funded retiree, it scares me to think when Labor are saying things like they look like they're going to increase taxes and they can't answer questions around that. Where are you going with my superannuation? Are you coming for my superannuation? Can I live comfortably in my retirement that I created for myself?
Susan?
Jason, I can understand why you've got anxiety around it. I have a self-managed super fund as well. I've had my own business for 25 years. I've been self-employed most of my life. So I have seen the changes in the last decade, change after change after change. What we've said is there needs to be certainty for superannuants and those heading towards it. And so that's the commitment we've made. We think there are probably things that could be one day done better, but they need to be conversations over a long period of time. And right now we think the thing you need most is certainty. So we've committed to no changes to superannuation. The other thing that I know people are anxious about as they age, and I'm getting very close to 60, and that is aged care. And one of the things that I think everybody who is heading towards retirement should be looking to a government to do is to make sure that we've restored dignity to our aged care. And that is not the case now. I've seen how it's been neglected for nearly a decade. And we have to start repairing it. It won't be a quick fix. I have a dad in aged care. I see incredible carers, but I see how stretched they are. And we have to start working on that so that you can feel comfortable using your superannuation in your retirement, knowing you're going to have a dignified aged care.
Sarah, answer about superannuation and throw in whatever else you want.
Well, that didn't answer your question at all, because quite frankly, the one point I did agree with, and that was certainty. And the only certainty you, Jason, have, and other people in your situation, is keeping a Liberal government in power in the next few weeks as we head into the election, because they won't touch your superannuation. And I can guarantee you, those policies that the Labor Party took to the election 3 years ago, that they will not come clean on now, that they will not answer the questions when put to media about whether they'll bring back changes to negative gearing or franking credits. They will be coming after your money because they have already overcommitted election promises across the 151 seats. How are they going to pay for it? And it's people like you, Jason, in your phase of your life who should be worried, and rightly so.
All right.
Not true. We have absolutely said I knew that franking credit policy was a problem, and I've fed that back. I've been listened to. That is not going to be part of our story going forward, and we've said that in black and white, along with all the other things.
Let us retire in dignity. All right. Look after ourselves.
Thank you very much. All right. Sadly, no more time for questions in the room, but there is 30 seconds. That is the hardest 30 seconds to answer in any local electorate. Sarah, I'll start with you. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to be the MP?
I want to be the voice for my community, and I think my track record with the people of Macquarie proves that. Through my candidacy last time, through my roles as a councillor, through the multitude of boards that I sit on and volunteer, I want the community to know that what they need and what they require will be delivered. And we have delivered in this electorate locally. However, it's more important than what's just going on locally, and it is making sure we keep the Liberal Party in government, keeping Scott Morrison Prime Minister, keeping on track with the plan that we have for a budget that moves forward, where we know that things are costed, where cost of living is addressed. And as I said before, as a daughter of a veteran, where we are in an uncertain world right now, it is the only party out there who is going to ensure defence and spending on defence is a national priority.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. Susan, why do you want to do it again for 3 years?
I've already given a clue that I'm doing this not necessarily for myself, but for future generations. I want to see us leave a better place than we have at the moment. And that does mean doing things to increase renewable energy, which everybody can see the sense of. It's going to be cheaper for us all, but it's also going to be better for the environment. It's also going to create jobs of the future. So for me, it's about the future. Everything we do with mental health is about making our young people and our adults more resilient to the changes that the world throws at us. So for me, it's pretty simple. It's about thinking like farmers do. How do I leave this place better than when I took it over? And that's what drives me, and I feel really privileged to have been able to represent this electorate through the last 2 terms of government, and I really hope that I will have the opportunity to carry that forward in government, not just in opposition.
All right, well, all roads go through Macquarie. Cheer for who you were here to cheer for. Cheer for them because they've put their hand up to be part of the great experiment that is the Australian democracy. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you to the people of Macquarie. We're going to have plenty more here from the Royal Hotel in Springwood next. Welcome back to the Royal Hotel here in Springwood. Now, joining us to discuss the rest of the day's news, none other than Bronwyn Bishop, Joe Hildebrand and Chris Smith, which is convenient because they were here earlier. Thank you very much, guys. Very quickly on what you've just seen, right? I've got to say, I think it's a particularly difficult task for people to have the national stage while dealing with the local issues. But what's also interesting is you can tell the messages that both parties are desperately wanting to get home and what you see about what's going to come out. So I want to ask you all, what do you think the messages both sides are trying to now granularly get in via every candidate at every chance?
Well, this is a seat where personality matters and connection to the electorate matters. It always has. It's been a seat that's changed hands very often. At one stage when it was held by the Liberal Party, it even ended up in the High Court with a challenge decision. So it's changed a lot. But I think what we saw here today, two competent women candidates, I have to say, I thought Sarah was outstanding, and I think she'll fight a very good fight. She missed out by a handful of votes last time, so I think it's a real contest here. But I think the knowledge of the problems that the people have, bringing people in to help, was impressive, particularly when I heard that young girls didn't know about the sorts of protections that were coming their way, and bringing a minister in to explain it was really a very strong point.
Now, again, I'm not adjudicating who won, who lost, but let's say you obviously think that Susan won, but it's not about that. It's about what you just saw.
Yeah, no, I thought they were both terrific. I really do, and both were very nice to me before the show. So. I think
personally, I was swayed by the clapping in the corner.
There's a couple of interesting. there's a couple of.
Thank you. It's my favourite thing about doing these things. People going, I'm in a rev. I'll change this. I can win it just by clapping.
There are a couple of really interesting things about the seat of Macquarie. One is that it's kind of a reverse bellwether, so it tends to go with the party, not the party that won the election, but the party that should have won the election.
Yeah, interesting.
So, for example, in 2010, it went with the Liberal Party, but Julia Gillard just got home with minority government. And, of course, in 2016, when everyone was stunned by Malcolm Turnbull's result that got absolutely torn away, it went to the Labor Party, which was indicative of what was actually the mood that was on in the electorate.
The reverse bellwether. This is a new term.
It's like the reverse bellwether.
No, Joe.
So you should be happy with both those results.
You're clearly not staying here tonight. He's clearly leaving the second it finishes.
Listen, Joe, the thing you forget about this seat is it has had a hell of a lot of redistributions. And that determines a hell of a lot the way the seat goes.
But I suppose the interesting problem you have with Susan being an incumbent is that she's a Labor incumbent with a Liberal government. So she has to defend what she's been able to do as a local member while attacking what the government has done in the same term that she's been there. So I think Sarah was very good, very clean, very punchy, but I thought Susan had the more difficult job because she was both offence and defence at the same time. And I thought
Come on, Labor people, you're supposed to be clapping now.
The fact that she
and Liberal people, you're supposed to be booing now.
And I think that
there you go. God, play your part, everyone. Goodness me, if you're going to stack a room, play your damn part.
And,
thank you.
And I think the fact that she closed on climate change as the big number one issue in front of a Sky News audience was what Sir Humphrey Appleby would call courageous.
Chris Smith was courageous.
But obviously,
it also indicates lack of anything else to say.
But I suppose it also indicates that is less of a divisive issue and won't be able to be weaponised this time around as much as it was last time around.
All right, now, I know everyone else has shown it, but can we please just revel in the weirdness of Lonely Joe? Lonely Joe Biden today at the White House. President of the United States, okay? You should be able to obviously own any room you walk into while you are the standing President of the United States. But the rock star that he was deputy to was the one who ended up owning the room. It was a celebration of the Affordable Care Act. And as people can see here, he's literally standing, looking around, no one talking to him. And even when he was trying to say Barack, Barack, and he physically touched him, he was ignored. Now, I've got to say, Chris, I can't stand the bloke, but I feel sorry for him.
I felt the same way when I first saw that. Not only were the security turning their backs on him, but his vice president was turning her back on him. And Barack Obama couldn't even react when he grabbed his shoulder for a what? 20 seconds, 30 seconds?
Yeah, it was kind of classless from Obama in that you're there to give him a rub, then, in the political term, so then turn around and do that. Be there to support. Instead, it was, oh, great, we've gone back into a time machine and Barry's in charge again, Joe.
Yeah, it's horrible, and it's that reason alone why I will never ever go into politics, apart from the fact I haven't been elected. But it was like...
You're doing your work now.
Why doesn't he have his minders looking after him? Why doesn't he have someone in the room? Like, obviously the bloke's brain is porridge. Why doesn't he have people making sure that this doesn't happen? Because it happens again and again and again. Yeah. Whereas Dr. Biden, his wife, is a doctor, as she keeps telling us. Where's Jen Psaki? Where are his cabinet colleagues if it's not an event where
they threw him to the wolves in that whole process? And it wasn't just 5 seconds. This isn't selective. It was a continual fobbing off.
So uncomfortable.
Yeah,
it was awful.
The bloke was talking to a plot plan.
Yeah.
And, I mean, he was just talking to... Said, why is this guy who looks like a flag being so quiet to him?
Well, it's that thing. If you want... I mean, as election ads go, right? Remember when George W. Bush went and tried to open a door and it was locked? Yeah. And everyone, ha, 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 and that went on and on and on and on. How many of these can the Republicans be handed? They've got 10 minutes of raw footage.
Absolutely. But you said you were sorry for him. Sorry, I'm not. Because it's because he was elected that the world is in such a mess. I said prior to that 2020 election that if Joe Biden was elected, then the world became an unsafe place. Because no matter what people thought of Trump, I believe Putin would not have invaded Ukraine if he had been president. He simply wouldn't have. But the weakness of Biden has made the whole of the West weak, and the sooner we get some change, the better.
All right, let's talk about old mate Matt Keane, or Green Keane as we call him. Now, he's out there, of course, trying to dust up his credentials for a full-time job on the drum when eventually he leaves Parliament. And he's out there saying, I demand businesses have more gender equality, particularly in their leadership group, fine. The only problem is the organisation that he apparently has some significant control over, the New South Wales Liberal Party, is run by two blokes. Isn't it interesting when the male feminist has the opportunity to stand up or stand aside, he only ever stands up. He's not interested in standing aside, Bronwyn.
Well, Matt Keane is I've said before, Malcolm Turnbull's the organ grinder and Keane's the monkey. And it is just sad to see. He's struggling as Treasurer and he'd better lift his game, and that's where he'd better put his effort. Because it's a big pet portfolio where he's not had any experience, and he better damn well get down, knuckle down and learn something and butt out of other people's business.
I wonder whether this is changing though, Paul, because we had the new planning minister turn around in the last 24 hours and say there'll be no more net zero decisions on businesses, I think that were applying for grants or something anyway, but the planning laws would change. We're not going down the Matt Keane path. I wonder whether the party's starting to wake up to the direction that Matt Keane began to take them when he became Treasurer.
Well, I think he still overwhelmingly controls the party and he has the numbers. There's no doubt about that. And it's a weird situation where, this looks like it. But
he's the leader of the left.
But and the left has the numbers. The left has the left. That's why Dominic Perrottet is the premier, because the left has the numbers and they gave it all to the far right.
I'm sorry, there is a split in the right.
Yes.
And
the left has teamed up with the right of that split and left the centre right.
And the only reason that you can say there might be some hope for the Liberal Party is the fact that Matt Keane did not get to be premier.
Well, the interesting thing is, you say, why didn't he give up his position? In Matt Keane's defence, I will say he could have been deputy leader, and he gave up his deputy leadership.
Defending him.
No. He gave up his deputy leadership to another man.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, to another bloke. He's committed to the cause. He's all in.
But that's all right. Boys are all right.
Now, I think it's odd that Wimbledon is going to say that any Russian players won't be able to play at the tournament this year because, of course, they are citizens of a country that's invading another. Now, if they were representatives of the state, that's one thing. But this is basically an individual sport, Chris.
It's different to FIFA. What FIFA did was clearly say, Russia is Russia, you shouldn't be playing World Cup, you shouldn't be doing any of that, but this is different. These are individual players. Now, I understand that Daniel Medvedev has actually got a hernia at the moment, so maybe Vladimir Putin has given him that hernia. He might continue. It mightn't be an issue come Wimbledon, but I think a lot of people would say if you're going to isolate the country, maybe we disagree with you, Paul, and maybe we say we continue on this path and isolate any Russians that play big name tennis.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah,
I think he should be not allowed to play, because Russia is feeding off its pride. Putin is saying, I want to build the grand Russia again. And to have someone who is a Russian who is refusing to say he disapproves of what Putin has done because he's got family at home in Russia, but wants to play, that becomes a question of national pride, and Putin wins. So it may be seen as unfair to the individual, but I'm sorry, he should not be allowed to play.
Also now, let's get to Victoria, where the Andrews government's been dinged again. Now, I do love how slow government can work, really. Like, when Andrew Bogut bangs out an Instagram post, instantly gets a warning. The Andrews government, and we talked about it at the time, took out ads about our fair share at the MCG during a federal election campaign. Overtly political, right? It's only now that they've been dinged, and who knows what happens after you've actually been dinged in these situations, Chris. I got a crazy idea. I don't think any government advertising should be there in the calendar year of an election. I just don't think that is what should happen, unless, of course, it's for literally some sort of serious emergency stuff. Otherwise, they all take the piss.
They do.
At every level, every time.
It's always half political. There's always a political spin in it all, and maybe you've got to just say, nah, we're not going to play it. We're not going to find, you know, the sensitivity of a health argument. Maybe forget that. Leave that to the health department to do. Keep the politicians out of it. But they won't pay a zack for that. You know, the Victorian government won't pay a zack for what they've been caught doing. We all knew it was wrong at the time. It was so drastically wrong. But we don't have a system in place to punish those who deserve to be punished.
But also, it's this thing, Joe, where we've got the Ombudsman and the Auditor General's office.
Yep.
The basic umpires that are around. They've dinged this government multiple times, be it red shirts, be it ads, but he'll win an absolute canter in November.
Yeah, and the issue I have with this, believe it or not, is not so much the dodginess and not so much of the grey area or the bending of the rules or whatever, because everyone does it. It's the sanctimoniousness on every other issue. So, and it's a little bit similar to how I felt about the kitching stuff as well. It's like, okay, if you're going to be dodgy, if you're going to do what everyone, both sides do from time to time, bend the rules, use your electorate staff for campaigning, or to use taxpayer money to say what a great job your government's doing and what a crap job the other side's government's doing, fine. But then to lecture people about everything under the sun, from COVID-19, if you even dared to question any of the draconian rules and arbitrary rules that are being handed out, suddenly you're a granny killer and you didn't care.
Yeah, but they arrested a lady for posting something on Facebook.
Exactly.
But they used taxpayer funds to put ads up at the MCG. Nothing will happen.
Absolutely nothing will happen. Nothing happened about the red shirts. Nothing happens about the fact that you've got the person elected under the title the Sex Party, who literally seems to have the Premier around the little finger. I just find no, the red shirts. I just find what happens in Victoria absolutely appalling. I really do. He got away with 800 people dying in aged care homes, and yet has the temerity to try and take a moral high ground.
Yeah.
But it's up to the goddamn opposition to get out there and fight.
Yep.
Fight.
The problem is no one can remember their names.
Well, but correct. But the first time they started to show signs of fight was because Matthew Guy had to spend a week at home, and then he sort of fought with passion because it was about him. Mate, that train's left a long time ago about isolation.
But he was out this afternoon having a go at the Andrews government for getting away with something that he recognised was wrong at the time as well. He was out there.
All right, 30 seconds defence of Dole Bludgers, Joe Hildebrand. Go.
We need Dole Bludgers. Do you really want these sorts of people in positions of responsibility? They can't even write a resume, for God's sake. They're lazy, they're indolent, they're incompetent.
And you want us to pay for it?
Well, better that than have them filling out your tax returns. Imagine that.
Now, by the way,
making your coffee. You'd be better off drinking coffee from Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, if you think this is just a fever dream, Joe wrote the defence of toll budgets today
I thought I'd give it a try.
online.
Joe, you could have them out filling in all the potholes that we've got in the roads. That would be a
Yes.
very good start.
True.
Old school, Bronny, I love it.
Absolutely.
I thought that was what the Extinction Rebellion protesters were for.
They just sit in the potholes. But we need a sliding scale. If someone's going to be unemployed and not try and get jobs, I know we should have a sliding scale. Right at the very beginning, when you
Absolutely.
lose your job, we want to give you more help than you get on unemployment today. We want to double the unemployment rate, but it's sliding scale depending on the way you behave going for a job during your period of unemployment.
What was the online reaction, by the way? What was the comment section like?
I think the Telegraph comment section was confused. I've got it to
It
everyone
was red
else's.
hot, it had steel caps and it's your backside it was kicking.
I remember when I filed it the night before, the editor went, I did not see that coming.
All right,
I
well,
like a
you know,
challenge.
well, there's only so many times you can say Albo's not work. Thank you very much. Do appreciate it. Joe, Chris, Bronwyn, and everyone in the room, thank you very much. Do appreciate it. We'll see you again very soon. The wonderful Rita Panahi is standing by with the Rita Panahi Show live from Melbourne. Remember, to win government, you've got to win Macquarie. More in a second.